Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today kicked off a very important tournament of the year, the Candidates Tournament. The winner of this tournament will go on to face Magnus Carlsen in November for the World Championship. Now, we're going to take a little bit of time just to go over who qualified for the Candidates Tournament, so y'all know all the competitors, because it is such a high-profile tournament. The first person is going to be Vishy Anand. He qualified because he lost to Magnus Carlsen in the 2014 World Championship. 2015, we did not have a World Championship, so that makes this tournament even more important because Magnus Carlsen's kind of been hanging out there for 2 years waiting for someone to battle him in November. So Vishy Anand, because he lost, he is the first competitor in this tournament. The next two are going to be the top two finishers from the 2015 Chess World Cup. Those are Sergei Karyakin and Peter Svidler, two Russian grandmasters, both very good players. Excited to see them in this tournament. The next two are going to be the top two finishers from the 2014-2015 Chess Grand Prix. We've been covering that series of tournaments over the past 2 years, and the top two finishers were Fabiano Caruana and Nakamura, two American grandmasters, so excited to see a couple Americans in there. The next two were the highest rated players that played in either the World Cup or the Grand Prix. Those players are Topalov and Anish Giri, so excited to see those players in here. And then lastly, there's a wild card, the nomination by the organizers. They go out and kind of choose someone, and they chose Levan Aronian, an extremely talented player, always does well in these type of tournaments. So those are the 8 players in this tournament. It's about 20 days. So from March 10th, we kind of had the inaugural kickoff with the opening ceremonies. Today, March 11th, we had round 1. This is going to go till March 30th. Each player will play each of their opponents twice. They'll play one as white and one as black. So this will be a 14 round tournament. There's going to be a lot of chess played. We're going to cover as much as possible. So make sure you check out both on YouTube, the channel, and then on the website as well. The chesswebsite.com will have some extended coverage on there as well. But going to be an exciting tournament. With that, we'll go ahead and kick off. What better way to kick off round 1 than Vishy Anand, who won this tournament the previous year in 2014. He won and went on to play Magnus Carlsen, ended up losing, but he is now back to revenge his world championship, and so he's going to be facing off against Topalov, playing the black pieces. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Vishy Anand decided to start with pawn to e4, something we don't see from him very often. d4 is almost always his go-to play on the first move, but pawn to e4, switching things up a little bit. Pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop here to b5, getting into the Ruy Lopez, and then knight to f6, the Berlin defense. And this defense we've just seen more and more over the past year and a half, to be honest, so no surprise here from Topalov to go ahead and play knight here to f6. What was a little bit interesting is the pawn here to d3, the anti-Berlin defense, if you will. Usually we're kind of seeing that castle on the king side, knight taking here on e4, and then pawn up here to d4. We don't see that. Instead, we see just a pawn here to d3, a bishop here to c5, a castle on the king side, pawn here to d6, just solidifying the pawn chain here, and then pawn to c3 with every intention of pushing forward here with a pawn to d4. Now we see black castle on the king side, knight here to d2, and then black has a few options. He could be pretty passive and just kind of stay back, or he could be pretty aggressive. So his two options are knight here to e7, which is to kind of hang back right here. As you can see, the knight's not even coming here to d5 or f5 anytime soon. So he has that option, or he could play bishop here to e6, get his light square bishop involved into the action, try to control the center of the board a little bit more. Decides to go and play knight here to e7. Not my favorite move. I definitely wish he had played a little bit more aggressive. Now Vishy Anand plays pawn here to d4, and there's no real defense that black has from this, so he just kind of has to allow Vishy Anand to go ahead and take this. So pawn takes here, pawn takes back here on d4, and then bishop back here on b6. Now this is a little bit different. If we were to see, instead of knight coming back here to e7, bishop here to e6, now Vishy Anand tries that pawn here to d4. We see the capture here, but then after the knight takes, because the knight's there on c6, attacking and defending the square here on d4, white can't really do anything because the bishop is also defending this square as well. So just a very different approach is how Topalov wants to play in the Berlin defense. But in the game, knight here to e7, and then we do see the exchange on board, and then bishop back here to b6. Rook here to e1, just centralizing, defending this pawn here on e4 as it pushes forward. Bishop here to g4, just getting light square bishop involved into the game. Pawn here to h4, kicking the bishop back, and then pawn to a4. And this is a novelty for white. This is something that we don't usually see, and so this kind of tells me that Vishy Anand has prepared something special for this tournament. I don't always feel like Vishy Anand is the best player at the tournaments he plays in, but I always do feel like he is the most prepared. He's the most methodical as far as how he approaches his matches, especially depending on who his opponent is, how we'll go into preparation for that. And so pawn here to a4, I don't know if he necessarily just looked at the Berlin defense because he's been playing against it so often, especially in his matches against Magnus Carlsen. He just saw maybe something specific when he was white. If he kind of played that pawn here to d3, maybe got to this exact position, and he thought pawn here to a4 is not really seen, but he thought it was just an improvement over what's been out there before. All in all, though, pawn here to a4, played it confidently, so it definitely seems like he knew what he was doing. Pawn here to a6, forcing the bishop out. The bishop can really come to a couple places. Bishop here to e2 if he wants to kind of stop that pin down on the knights on f3. Or could just bring it back here to f1. That's what he decides to do. A rook here to e8, just centralizing right here, trying to control the semi-open file. Pawn here to a5, just forcing the bishop back here to a7. And this does kind of lock this bishop out right now. The bishop can't come here to b6, can't come here to c5 because of these pawns. So later on, Topalov definitely wants to kind of break open the center of the board so his dark square bishop can control a little bit more of the game. Queen here to b3. As you look at both sides, white's really doing a good job of being aggressive on board. Controls the center of the board. He has both of his bishops can easily get involved into the action. Black's kind of cramped on board. The light square bishop over here isn't doing too much. It's pinning down a knight to nothing right now. Both of these knights aren't really doing too much. They can't really get involved into the game. They're not really protecting their own pawns in the center. This queen right now is kind of blocked off. This bishop here on a7's not doing too much. So Vishy Anand doing a good job. Topalov kind of just hanging back, trying to find if he can find an opening on board. Decides to go and play knight here to c6, attacking this pawn here on d4. So Vishy Anand just decides to go and push it forward with pawn here to d5, forcing the knight to come down here to d4 almost. And then the capture, bishop here to d4, and then the queen takes here on b7. And this is one of those moves that afterwards they asked Vishy Anand about and kind of said, hey, Topalov just gave you this pawn here on b7. Did you ever think about not taking it? He said, yeah, I considered queen here to b4, bishop here to c5, potentially queen here to c4, knight here to d7. He just didn't feel like he liked his pieces. He thought they would be somewhat silly looking if he didn't take here on a b7. So all in all, although he wasn't super happy about it, he said, decided to go ahead and take with his queen here on a b7. Topalov was able to get compensation back for that pawn, so he plays knight here to d7. Very important move because it's a pseudo way to protect this pawn here on a6. Right now, the bishop before that could have just come here to a6, being protected by the queen right here, but white can no longer do that because of knight here to c5. So knight here to d7, a very important move for Topalov. After knight here to d7, we see the knight come up here to d4. Now the knight come down here to c5, queen here to c6, and then knight down here to b3. And I think Topalov kind of gave up some of his momentum that he had. He kind of has his opponent's queen stuck up here where it's not really adding a lot of value on board. He has a pretty aggressive attacks that he can do. He has two different options that I really like. The first one is just going all out. Bishop taking here on f2. After Vishy Anand takes here on f2, the queen can come down, check. We could see the knight come in board, knight to e4 check. After the rook takes, the queen captures here. Although he gave up a minor piece, he has a very strong attack on board. And Topalov's going to have a really fun time just chasing Vishy Anand all over the board. So that's one option. Another option on board is just playing pawn here to f6. Then we have bishop here to e3 potentially. We see an exchange on board. Rook here to e7, getting ready for the bishop to come back here to e8, attacking that queen. There's not a lot of great squares for this queen to go to. This knight's being protected by the pawn. If he wants to kind of escape this way, he's going along those light square, diagonal squares where this bishop would be attacking. So all in all, I really like this attack. Topalov decided to go for a different path, and instead of either of those, he plays knight here to b3, and then rook here to b1, and then he plays knight takes here on c1. Another move that I just really don't like. I think even in this position, it's fine, but this dark square bishop right now is not doing a whole lot. I think even just busting things open with pawn here to f5, it's a way for Topalov to be very aggressive, where he knows his opponent's does not have all of his pieces kind of unified right now, and this kind of breaks it open. He can get his rook very involved into the game, putting a lot of pressure on this e-file. He can easily get his queen involved into the game if he wants to. He still has this bishop eyeing down on the f2 square. So all in all, I do think he made a big mistake here. Knight taking here on c1, and then the rook recaptures, and then rook over here to b8, attacking this pawn right here. Somewhat being held down by the knight, but does need some added protection since we have the bishop and the rook both attacking that square. But decides to go ahead and gobble up material first. Queen here to a6. Now the queen's going to come down here to h4. Threatening mate right here. So rook here to c2. Both defending the square here on f2. And then also defending the square here on b2, which we talked about. Topalov now comes down to e4, capturing material. That's going to come back here to e3. Queen back here to d8. Queen centralizing here to c4. Does have a pass pawn now here on the a file. Bishop here to g6, just trying to defend some pieces. Bishop here to d3. Wasn't really doing too much on f1, so does need to make sure he gets involved into the action. Rook here to f4. And then the bishop takes here on g6. I think Anand definitely missed an opportunity here. Topalov had kind of the advantage, and then he kind of squandered it a little bit as he kind of just gave up his knight, gave up kind of his attack here. Anand, on the other hand, he kind of has the advantage. He could have easily played pawn here to g3, and this is really difficult for Topalov to deal with. The queen could come down here to g5, trying to hold on to that so the pawn can't take here. But just the queen comes up here, capture here on c7, rook over here on f8, just trying to hold down material right here. Now after the exchange, this is going to be good for Anand. In the game, he decided to go ahead and start with the bishop taking here on g6, which in the worst move, I just think there was a slight improvement with pawn here to g3 first. After the pawn takes, now we're going to see pawn here to g3, rook here to e4, attacking the knights, pawn up here to a6. Anytime you have a pass pawn, you should always be looking to push that pawn. And now it does have protection from this queen here on c4. Queen here to e8, trying just to hold control of the center of the board. This e file is very important. It is the open file in the center. So definitely want to have the most powerful pieces, queens and rooks, involved into the action. Rook over here to e2, just kind of double barreling here. Bishop here to b6. Nice little outpost for the bishop, and also opening up the door for a discovered attack on this queen here on c4. So the queen has to move. Still wants to make sure it's holding down the fort, protecting this pawn here on a6. And now rook over here to a8. So attacking this pawn. With the rook, Anand does have the queen here on d3. Now he plays king here to g2. And this is another opportunity where I think Anand could have improved. Pawn here to b4 with the next move looking of pawn here to b5 would be very difficult for Topalov to deal with. Now, not sure how long he kind of analyzed this. Hopefully he would have seen that after rook taking here on b4, which is kind of the big threat that white has of playing pawn here to b4. The knight here to c2 is just deadly. Topalov could just essentially resign in this position, attacking both the rook and a discovered attack on the queen here on e8. So the pawn was protected, and then he could have just pushed forward with pawn here to b5. He didn't really potentially see that. He definitely didn't play. They played king here to g2. Now queen coming down here to a4, putting more pressure on the pawn here on a6. Now pawn here to b3. Not really doing what it really needs to. Rook here to d4. Topalov says, hey, I'll go ahead and trade off pieces if you want to. Anand decides, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Knight here to c4, and then rook captures here on a6, pawn up here to a5, bishop here to d4, rook up here to e8, now the king over here to h7. If you kind of look on board now, though, we have 5 pawns to 5 pawns. So while Vishy Anand kind of had the advantage, you can see both sides, they kind of go from the advantage to back to equal, and then Vishy Anand kind of had almost a really big advantage and then kind of gave it back a little bit. So definitely has maybe the more aggressive play right now with both of his rooks kind of teamed up right now attacking his opponent's king side of the board. But I do think he missed an opportunity to expand his lead that he already had going into the endgame. Rook here to c3. Knight here to d2, getting ready to play knight here to e4, and Topalov really does not want the knight to come here on e4. It's just too hard to stop. This controls so much of the board over here on the king side. It's almost a certain play that you have to play pawn here to f5, just kind of stopping that. If you can stop the knight from really getting involved, you can kind of mitigate the risk of these rooks over here. Instead, he decides to play rook here to c2. Probably the biggest blunder that he had in the game, although they're all making somewhat small errors throughout. Rook here to c2 is somewhat unacceptable. Knight here to e4, and there's no way to really stop it now. It's got a great attack that he has. Pawn here to f6 doesn't do anything for the defense here. Pawn here to h4. The rook takes here on a5, and then so black is up in material, but white just has so much over here on the king side of the board. Rook here to f7. Pawn here to g5, just trying to stop the attack as much as possible. A pawn here to h5, rook over here to f2. We do see an exchange on board, and that's going to be fine. Decides to go and just come up here to h3. So now we have 2 rooks versus a rook and a bishop. And then after the king takes, we see pawn here to f5, kind of a last effort now. And then rook to f5, and Topalov in this position resigns on board. So congratulations to Vishy Anand. The rest of the games today all tied out. And so we have Topalov at the bottom with 0 points, Vishy Anand with 1, and everyone else with half a point. So could not have started any better for Vishy Anand. So I know he's got a ton of support out there. So congratulations to him. Really excited to see kind of how he plays out in this tournament. There's a lot of young chess players that I know a lot of people, myself included, to be honest, are kind of hoping they can make a splash. Having Magnus Carlsen play someone else under 25 would be pretty cool. But Vishy Anand, you can never count him out. He's very methodical in what he does, and starting out with a victory bodes very well for him and his supporters. So congratulations. Really looking forward to the next 3 weeks of chess. Hopefully you guys are excited. If you didn't know about this tournament, get excited because there's going to be some awesome chess. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.